Do you want your business to grow faster? Are you open to new and out-of-the-box ways to drive revenues and increase value? How do you imagine the most successful entrepreneurs and business leaders double, triple, or expand their businesses tenfold or more? The answer is deals. This is a weekly podcast featuring conversations with business owners, executives, and leaders as we reveal behind-the-scenes details that give you, our listeners, the confidence to pursue your own deal-driven growth. On this show, we discuss a huge variety of deals, everything from large, complex mergers and acquisitions, capital raising, joint ventures, strategic alliances, real estate, affiliate and sponsorship deals, franchising, and more. My name is Kupfer, and I've been supporting deal-driven growth for businesses for over 35 years as a successful entrepreneur, professional negotiator, and attorney. My goal is to help you strategize, plan for, find, and complete deals that will help your company grow faster. Welcome to the Deal Quest podcast. Let's get started. Hey, Deal Quest community, another solocast, and I want to talk about some of the, let's say, cliches or sayings or accepted wisdom, maybe sometimes that people say in and around the deal world that may, and sort of unpack whether these things are true or not true, right? And, there's a reason why something becomes a cliche or an accepted wisdom. And a lot of times it's because there's some level of truth in it, but there are myths and misconceptions, and there are certainly situations in which those things may be applicable in certain situations, but not in others, right? I'm going to start out with one that's a saying that I actually like to say, right? It makes a point to clients a lot of times and whatever when they're looking at deals and they get sort of like top line offers. And I say, listen, there's a famous saying in the deal space: give me a price, I'll give you a structure. Give me a structure, I'll give you a price, right? In unpacking that, what's important about that understanding? Too many folks, especially if they're not sophisticated deal makers, if they're going through it the first time, they might easily get enamored with a like top line dollar price that's promised to them. Oh, we can, you'll get whatever, 10 million, 100 million from this deal. But let me take an extreme. Like if that 100 million is paid, all up front, or that 100 million is paid over 10 years, or that 100 million is paid over 100 years, right? No such deal I've ever seen, but you get my point. It's a whole different deal. And, so my joke is if somebody asks for 10 times what their company is worth, the first reaction is, oh, forget it. That deal's never going to get done. Well, no, I can come up with a structure, right? If the company's worth $1 million and they want $10 million and I got 100 years to pay you, and I don't have to pay, interest on that, that's probably, I haven't done the math, but I'm sure that's a very good deal, right? And I'd be willing to do that. So the reason I give those extreme examples is because it just highlights a point. But the point is, this concept of give me a price, I'll give you a structure, or give me a structure, I'll give you a price, is important to understand because you want to delve into the structure of any deal that you're talking about, what the elements are, how that impacts your ability to actually recognize that price, what's the time value of money on that price, what's the risk involved in getting or not getting that price. So that's important to understand, right? Risk, contingencies, time value of money, what's up front, what's back end, what maybe there are bogeys or triggers or CAGRs that have to be hit to get it. So is that really purchase price? Well, it's purchase price for the purposes of structured right for capital gains treatment with the IRS, but is that's not purchase price for the existing value of the company. That's purchase price for future growth of the company. And will you hit that or not? That's just an example, right? Let's break this down a little further. And this sort of applies to other aspects of this as well, which I'll talk about a little later, like multiples, things like that. But let's just talk about the structure, right? In many, many M&A deals, there's upfront money, right, that you get at closing. Some of that money could be, then there could be a portion of that money or the total purchase price that's held back as an escrow for a year or two, just to make sure that all the representation and the warranties you're making as a seller are correct, right? That there aren't any hidden lawsuits or other issues or breaches that would cause liability for the buyer. And then if they're not, you get that escrow amount. There's also often a piece that is back-end money. But it's back-end money that's just on a promissory note. It's going to be paid. There's no contingencies to it other than the time passing. A portion of it will be paid over 3 years, 5 years, whatever, okay? On that, you may not have, contractually, you may have a total right to get that. There may be no contingencies for you to get that, but obviously you have the risk of the buyer's success and ability to pay you, and the fact that they're still going to be around to be able to pay you. Not to mention, if they are a bad actor and they just refuse to pay that money, you need to go sue them to go get it. Then you have portions of purchase price that might be back-ended that are contingent. For example, they might be contingent upon retention of revenue for a period of time. That's very common in the wealth management space to have a 2-year retention, for example. So if you don't hit whatever the contingencies are, as an example, the retention contingency, the purchase price gets adjusted down. You don't get all of that back end money. And then I talked about the growth, right? The CAGRs, right? The earnouts, where you have to hit certain growth targets to get that money. And, is it realistic that you will do that? On top of that, we've got rollover equity, right? In many of these deals, you're taking, you're getting a piece of equity that gets rolled over into the buyer's equity, which is good in a lot of ways in that it's tax deferred if done right, where you don't pay any capital gains at that time. You don't pay any taxes at that time when you roll into a portion of the buyer's equity. So let's say you get 80% cash, 20% equity, $10 million deal. The $2 million that you're getting in equity is not taxed at the time that's issued if done correctly. So that's nice. But is that equity worth the $2 million, right? What kind of equity is it? Would you make that investment if it was separate? Where do you stand, on the cap table? What preferences or priorities do people have above you? So, these are all pieces you need to evaluate in this conversation of this, I think, good cliche to trigger the right questions of give me a price. I'll give you a structure or saying and give you a structure, give you a price. Let's talk about another piece of comparing multiples, right? Everybody talks about multiples. This is like, oh, I got an 8 times multiple. I got a 12 times multiple. I got a 3 times multiple. I got a 26 times multiple. Multiple on what, right? That's the key question, right? Even if you're in the same industry and you get offers from multiple buyers or investors, if it's not a full buyout, maybe it's a financing deal, it's an investment deal by VC or whoever, and they're valuing your company and they're paying you a multiple. Well, first question is, what is the multiple of? Are we talking about a multiple of revenue, a multiple of EBITDA, a multiple of EBOC? And I won't go too down the road. I think most of the listeners understand some of those concepts, right? Revenue is top line revenue, EBITDA, interest, earnings before interest, taxes, and depreciation and amortization. EBOC is earnings before owner's comp. A lot of these, measures, okay, they're giving, but almost no deal is done. Let's take a very typical deal they quote a multiple of EBITDA. Well, it's almost always, pretty much always, a multiple of adjusted EBITDA. It's not your EBITDA. You could be running at 60%, EBITDA, but there are additional expenses a buyer is going to roll into that pro forma P&L going forward because they're going to say that they have a higher expense ratio because they got to beef up operations and compliance and all this stuff because you're underspending on it, right? And there may be some add backs you get in that increase your EBITDA multiple for example, discretionary personal expenses you're putting through your business. But the point is, it works off an adjusted EBITDA multiple, which is you got to figure out which buyers may be taking different positions on how they're adjusting and especially how much expenses they're adding in, right? That will adjust your EBITDA because if somebody's giving you an 8 or a 12 multiple, but they're doing it on 45% EBITDA versus 30% EBITDA, right? The one with the higher multiple may not be the higher price. You got to compare not just the multiples, you got to compare what the multiple is on and then how that is actually defined, right? Okay, so that's another, thing that people just talk about multiples. It's like, oh, I got an X multiple. Well, it's not apples and apples. It's not oranges and oranges. You really have to delve into it to understand what that really means. Okay, another thing that comes in this conversation about price and structure is sometimes you'll hear folks say, there's gurus out there, there's business brokers, there's various people who say, oh, get as much up front because there's no guarantee you'll get any more. In fact, that's probably the nicer way that some people say it. Some people say you're not getting, you have to assume you're not getting any back end money. You better be satisfied with the money you get up front. And I would say, this is one of those situations which, of course, it's not universally true across the board in any industry or any size deal. But it is more of an accurate statement, or let's call it a accurate material risk factor in more Main Street deals, right? In owner-operator deals. There's countless examples, right, in situations where somebody's an owner-operator sells to another owner-operator or a new person that's coming in to learn how to run the business, and they have trouble running the business. They're running it to the ground, or they're not making as much profit, or, things aren't going well, or they have personal situations where they need more money, and for various reasons they stop paying the back end. And then you got to sue them, or you got to take back the company. And yet you see these situations where owners come back in and they take back the company, and now they got to go back into it, or they thought they were done. And that doesn't always happen on Main Street, level deals, but it's certainly more of a risk in those kind of deals.
Let's take a break from the show for a minute so I can tell you about an incredible resource my team and I have put together for you. Secrets of Deal-Driven Growth, Creative Ways to Grow Your Business Even in Challenging Times, is a powerful ebook that helps you take DealQuest podcast episodes and apply them to your own life and business. This is the ideal tool for anyone looking for creative ways to grow as deal makers, and you can get yours now. It's as easy as heading to corykupfer.com/workbook and downloading your copy. While you're there, you can also consider joining our dynamic deal-driven community of founders, experts, small business owners, and entrepreneurs. Now back to the show.
In most of the deals that we do, I have rarely seen in middle market deals and up, I have rarely seen a situation in which money, I'm not saying it doesn't happen. It's a risk. It could happen. It does happen sometimes, but it's a much, much, much smaller percentage of the situation where any kind of money that's guaranteed. And when I say guaranteed, meaning it's just back-end payments, like it's paid over time, but not on any contingency. Or let's say it does have like a retention contingency, but the people hit the retention numbers where the buyer doesn't make that payment. And it's in part because you have more professional players, right? That middle market and up level. And also, if you're talking about PE-backed buyers, remember, they're looking to do other deals. And if they really, really screw a lot of people, they're not going to get other buyers who are going to be interested. So it's less likely to happen there. Now, certainly the conversation of whether you hit your growth CAGR on earnouts and how likely that is and what promises a buyer may make for you in terms of how they can help you grow, and maybe those don't turn out to be as strong as you thought they would. That's more common. Again, I'm not saying that always happens. Sometimes the growth CAGRs, they could provide a lot of support and you hit them, and it's in their interest to do that. But we certainly see more instances where people don't hit their full growth CAGRs than, just getting screwed out of money that's just back end guaranteed, or that is just based upon a retention or whatever, as the deal size gets bigger. But listen, I mean, there are these examples of these, the Enrons and the WorldComs and the various big companies that have gone out of business, over the years. So, there's always risk in that. But I will tell you that, first of all, none of these deals are going to pay you all the money up front. So that's just a practical reality. And two, you have to, when you make these statements about risk, about never do this, or don't expect any money on the back end or get as much up front. Well, if you have a quality buyer, and by the way, you should be doing reverse due diligence on them and their financials, you may be able to get a much higher price with money over time. And if you're at a level, buyers that are reliable and experienced and have a track record of paying the back end, may not be in your interest. Not to mention the fact that you pay taxes generally, I don't want to give advice here, but, in general on these installment sales, you'll pay taxes as the money comes in. So, it might be more tax advantageous to separate the money out over a period of years as opposed to taking it in all in 1 year and having to pay the tax up front on it. Okay. The next one is an interesting one because this is a comment somebody made. I was at an event. They had an M&A sort of breakout discussion, and somebody was sharing their experience selling their business. And the comment she made was, no, I got screwed. I was an S Corp. Nobody should ever be an S Corp. And the reason why she had an issue was that she didn't understand that she had this ability to make the QSBS, Qualified Small Business election, if she were a C Corp. And in her case, that would have saved her a lot of money because you can shield 10 million or more, 50 million, depending upon, again, I won't go down the QSBS road too far. But the point is, if you structure that right and it's applicable to you and you're a C Corp and you make QSBS election, you can shield 10 million plus from capital gains treatment. You don't pay any tax on it. In an S, you don't have that ability, right? So in her case, she was actually accurate. She would have been better off. But to make then this blanket statement, first of all, there are a lot of industries that don't qualify. I mean, lawyers don't, investment advisors don't, accountants don't, a lot of service businesses don't qualify for QSBS. And then if you're a C Corp, you're double taxed. So that would be the worst, scenario. And, so it really depends upon what scenario you're in. There's another challenge would be an S Corp. if you're selling to a buyer and the buyer is giving part cash, part equity, and some of the owners want to take more or less cash versus more or less equity, you have problems doing that in an S Corp. So there are reasons why there are downsides to being an S, but there are also upsides to being an S or to having, we'll often structure folks as a partnership entity like an LLC partnership with individual S Corps above it. I won't go, again, too far into that structuring, but the point of it is this never should, always whatever conversation about entity structuring is very, very dangerous. You really, really want to get advice because depending upon what business you're in, depending upon when because there's also periods of time that come into play with QSBS, whatever, when you're going to sell, how quickly you're going to sell, and what you think the purchase price will be, what the ownership structure is, what the goals are. There could be all different, structures that may benefit you. So this thought that you should never be this or always be this type of entity or have this type of tax status is dangerous. Finally, I think there's one other I want to talk about, which is this concept that, it's funny, like there's this thing in the entrepreneurial world, which I've talked about on this podcast about this pressure to scale, right? Everybody's got to scale. Everybody's got to scale. And, that's what entrepreneurship is. And people do it. It's not always aligned with their values. They get to bigger scale. They're not happy or whatever, right? But the interesting part is you have that out there, which I've talked about. And then you also have this view that certain businesses, and in fact, maybe most businesses aren't scalable, or at least a lot of businesses aren't scalable, and that most businesses are not sellable. There's truth in that. I want to parse words a little bit, though, right? Most businesses are not sellable because they're too dependent upon the owner, because they haven't created systems, because they don't have maybe, ongoing recovery revenue. Like, there's a lot of reasons why that statement could be true. And, there is certainly certain industries that are a lot easier. I mean, it's certainly easy to scale a SaaS business than it is, a business that requires a lot of labor. Okay. But I believe, and I think it's been shown, that every business is potentially scalable. Okay. In seemingly unscalable businesses, Gary Vaynerchuk talks about this all the time, right? On how all of his tech friends will like, why are you doing marketing? It's not a scalable business. Meanwhile, he's scaled that to be a very significant business. There are definitely businesses that are more challenging to scale, but I don't think there's such thing as an unscalable business. I think it's just a lot harder to scale. Most people will not necessarily do or want to do what it takes or are interested in doing what it takes to scale it. And that corresponds to this conversation that, most businesses aren't sellable. The truth is any business is potentially sellable if you take the steps to make it sellable and you get rid of the reasons why it's not sellable. So you have to, again, watch out for these. Like, what you don't want it to happen is have it be a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? You own a business that's in an industry that's not seen to be scalable and that somebody tells you, quote unquote, will never sell, as opposed to saying, all right, well, I guess I'll just die with my boots on or leave the business behind, when I leave, or have one of my employees take it over at very minimal amount. You should say to yourself, okay, what is it about my business that doesn't have it be scalable or sellable right now? And what can I change and what can I learn from businesses that have scaled or that have sold so I can make my business scale more and be more sellable if that's what I want to do? And if you ask yourself that question, there will always be steps that you could take that will make your business, no matter what the industry is, more scalable and more sellable, right? So I think that's another one of these things that, it's an interesting contrast where there's this, on the one hand, this pressure that everybody's got to scale, and then on the other hand, this view that most businesses can't scale. So I think that's, that's one to look at. That's a fascinating thing. I can go down the line. I mean, there's so many other, whatever it's cliches or myths or assumptions in businesses. And, and I talked a lot about these things that are more in the M&A world, but some of these apply, the give me a price, give me a structure can certainly apply, across other joint ventures, strategic alliances, licensing deals, right? The royalties and licensing, again, similar conversation about the multiples, right? If it's a royalty, what is that? What's not only the percentage of royalty, you get an offer where somebody's going to give you 8%, somebody's going to give you 6%. Oh, the 8% is better. Well, not necessarily, right? What is the base on which the 8-6% is on, right? Is it total sales? Is it net revenue? Is it some sort of profit number? Are there contingencies about making that money, or how long are you guaranteed for that? Are there any minimums you have to hit? right? So you can apply these concepts to other types of deals as well. And they're, I guess, the simple way to say is that there's no one size fits all. There's no business wisdom that applies across the board. You really, really want to investigate these things and not take them as gospel. Be aware, I mean, there's a reason on where they come from, but not to take them as gospel because somebody, a friend of yours, some successful business person, some guru has said them, because they're not necessarily true in your particular industry, at your size, at your time, or if you are creative and find ways, around them. So that's what I'm going to leave you with this week. And if any of you, I would love when this posts, if any of you have some of these other sort of myths or sayings or things we want to debunk or say that they only apply in certain situations or wisdom that's not necessarily wisdom, definitely let me know. I would love to hear your views on it as well. All right. Until next week, Corey Kupfer saying goodbye.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of Deal Quest, where we help you understand how deal-driven growth can be your ticket to freedom. If you are interested in finding out more about my law firm, the services we provide to entrepreneurial and growing companies across industries all over the country, and my partner Brian Megan and I, and my amazing team, just head over to kupferlaw.com. That's kupferlaw.com. And if you want to follow more of my content, head over to my LinkedIn page where I post regularly. I'm Corey Kupfer. Until next week, wishing you the freedom and financial prosperity that I know your Deal Quest will bring.